Well, hello and welcome, my friends. I'm Kodiak Broncos, and today I am here to talk about the Broncos defense, and I'm here to talk about how the Broncos, transformed into a very pedestrian unit to one of the NFL's best in almost a couple of years. But before we get into it, I just want to say a couple things. First of all, if you like, if you enjoy, subscribe if you're not already. You always wait until the end. Hopefully, I've earned it. And yeah, without further ado, let's dive right into it. I don't think a lot of people are going to believe this because of Sean Payton's reputation. And, there are some narratives out there about him, about the mid 2010 New Orleans Saints. But 8 out of 13 first round picks with Sean Payton Saints were on the defensive side of the ball. So he clearly is a head coach that wants to prioritize investment on the defensive side of the ball. And hey, I get it when Drew Brees is your quarterback, but the fact that it's been more of the same here in Denver, okay, think about this past offseason. We went Barron in the first round. I don't even think any mock draft from any connected insider actually had Barron going to the Broncos. What else happened? We took Hugh Robinson in the fourth round when a lot of people were just like, this is a luxury pick. Like, what are we doing? We took Jonah Ellis in the third round. So basically, the skin and bones of the team, a lot of people, I think, are not understanding that we prioritize heavily the defensive side of the ball, not only in free agency, but in the draft as well. And the draft one is the one that really sticks out to me. And I think part of the thing is they want to draft, they're drafting an equal amount. I think it's been more of the same with a nice tilt to the defensive side of the ball ever since George Payton's taken over. And I think it's been more of a 50-50 split since Sean Payton took over. But, they very much prioritize pass rush. They very much prioritize secondary. And every single year of the Sean Payton, George Payton regime, we have drafted a defensive back and an edge rusher. Or I shouldn't say an edge rusher because Sanders in 2023 wasn't an edge rusher, but he was a blitzer with the upside of, rushing the pass or whatever. But he also views the defense as a foundational piece that supports the offense as well, and vice versa. Okay. Sean Payton, a lot of people criticize him for not going tempo, and he's like, well, I don't want to wear our defense out. Our defense is one of our best attributes. I want to keep them off the field and I want to give them time to rest. But he also views the defense as a foundational piece for the offense success. Okay. He said, 2K Adams, what are the two things that can really support a quarterback? A strong running game and a really good defense. And we have had one of those for most of the year. The run game started well, and it hasn't been great as of late. But the defense, like Sean Payton, he gets it. He gets why it's so important to invest in the defensive side of the ball. And I get every team invests in the defensive side of the ball. But for a guy like Sean Payton, I think everyone's pretty surprised. I think no doubt in my mind he was watching, Ekbuka or Henderson or Judkins or all those guys that could have been available in our range. Omarion Hampton as well. Or not even available in our range, but available like a couple spots later from us. And no doubt in my mind he was, well versed in the draft with what he wanted to do and his vision because, they use that word a lot. But then you invest in Jahdae Barron. So yeah, I think that just kind of encapsulates everything right now. And once again, he is largely responsible for the defense's success, in my opinion, because he has that vision, because he knows what he's looking for, because he wants to support the offense with a good defense. Now, two, I got to give George Payton his props here too. I've been very critical of Payton on this channel, but the reality, or George Payton that is, but the reality of the situation is he's done a really, really good job on the defensive side of the ball. Okay. Surtain over Fields may have been one of the best decisions in this organization's history. And the reason I say that is because, think about all the pressure that was happening from Denver radio and Denver media leading up to the 2021 draft. Everyone was like, all right, Drew Lock isn't the answer, so what are you going to do about it? Then they stay the course with their draft evaluations, and they draft in their opinion, can't-miss corner prospect, one who was their highest defensive player on the board. So, yeah, that's how I feel about that. That's how they feel about that, I should say. And it could have been so easy for George Payton, who is a first-time GM, coming into this new organization and being able and listening to the local media and being like, all right, I'm just going to make the fans happy, and then this is what happens. This is what came of it. Surtain over Fields was one of the best decisions this team has ever made. Now, not just in the first round, but late in drafts, he's also cooked as well. Okay, Benito at 64 in 2022. Jonathan Cooper in the 7th round in 2021. Adding Jaquan McMillan in the UDFA pool. Like, all those have been such great additions, fantastic additions for this team, and they've developed really well. And we'll talk about the development of these players later. But, in the draft, I feel like George Payton generally knows what he's doing on the defensive side of the ball. Even with the guys like Riley Moss and Chris Abrams-Drain, the other guys who can contribute on this team. Like, we've done really, really well on the defensive side of the ball in the draft. Jonah Ellis, I know he's, had a hard time staying healthy, but the reality of the situation is anytime he's on the field, he's very impactful. Q Robinson, this past week was the first week where I was just like, wow, the Q pick is really starting to come to fruition, especially because we were down Ellis and we didn't skip a beat. Robinson got a sack on 3rd and 1, a crucial 3rd and 1 at that. So yeah. And then in free agency, I know a lot of people say, well, we're not a draft team, we're a free agency team. And you know what? I'm not inclined to disagree because we added guys like Brandon Jones, Zach Allen, Malcolm Roach, and John Franklin Myers. Now, when all those happened, I was just like, all right. I think the only one I was really, really excited about was John Franklin Myers. Zach Allen, I was just like, I don't know how he's going to, replace Draymond Jones, who ended up getting the same contract and flailing out in Seattle. But I think all these guys have had a much bigger impact than any of us have anticipated. Like, I'm sure that even if you were the biggest Zach Allen fan in the world when we signed him, even if you were the biggest Brandon Jones fan in the world, even if you were the, largest supporter of Malcolm Roach as a run stopper down there in New Orleans, or, the Broncos getting a bargain for John Franklin Myers, I don't think any of you could have seen the amount of play, the high quality play that we've gotten from any of these guys panning out in the way that it has over the past few years. And we've also, since the defense is there, since the skin and bones of the defense has now worked out, what were we missing last year? We were missing linebacker, we were missing a safety. So, or I shouldn't say we were missing them, but they were our key liabilities down the stretch. So then you go out and get high risk, high reward moves like Greenlaw, Hufanga, and those have paid off. Now, obviously, it took a while for Greenlaw to really ramp up, but hey, man, it was worth the wait. Like, that's all I have to say about that. It was well worth the wait. And Hufanga, man, all pro Hufanga is back. So, now with all those other foundational pieces, like the foundation was there for the defensive side of the ball last season. That being said, you still clearly had some problems. You still had some issues in, tough matchups like Baltimore and Buffalo. But this year, I think this team is much more equipped and much more prepared to play a physical game. They can play any style. They need to, lock down the airspace in a shootout unless it's against Daniel Jones somehow. I still don't know how that game happened. If they need to play a grinded out physical game, and if they need to have the ball be in their hands on the last drive of the game, then I think everybody feels good about that. And, they have not lost us a single game this year. I'm just being so for real. They actually got the stop in Indy's final drive of the game to attempt a 60-yard field goal. And then, the offense, I primarily credit with letting us down in the Chargers game. But yeah, so ultimately, that's what I'm thinking about the defense. Like, you go out, you get high risk, high reward moves, and they've paid off. Number 3, Vance Joseph. And I credit Sean Payton with Vance Joseph's success as well. Vance Joseph, I think I really started to respect him and his process during All or Nothing with Arizona because, I got a pretty good glimpse onto how he runs his defense. And I was just like, all right, this guy wasn't lost like I thought he was as the head coach of Denver. And, during Kingsbury and Vance Joseph's time in Arizona, primarily it was the offense letting them down in the key games. But either way, Vance Joseph was a very unpopular hire at the time. I remember it was either Rex Ryan or Matt Patricia, and I think they leaked the Matt Patricia news to make us feel better about Vance Joseph or whatever. But Sean Payton deserves to have a lot of credit for this one as well because he stuck to his guns after the 70-point game. And they knew they had to switch philosophies. They knew that they had to cut ties with some toxic veterans who weren't making it work, and bring in the actual hungry guys ready to compete. And Vance Joseph, he talked about the vision for the defense yesterday. Take a shot every time I've said vision in this video. But he wanted to go from a 3-4 passive scheme, like a Vic Fangio scheme, which is what they ran for Fangio's tenure in Denver, and then with Evero as well, to a 3-4 attacking scheme with blitzing and pressure and, just shelling and doing a lot more things to confuse opposing offenses. And for that to be the case, the Fangio scheme is easier on the players because you don't have to, well, obviously you still have to communicate, but, for a 3-4 attacking scheme, you got to really, really know everything and you really got to have your awareness down. And it takes high IQ guys to make sure it happens, but also guys that are bought in to make it happen. Okay. I think about one play this year that really encapsulates this. I think about a blitz that we had against Jalen Hurts where we blitzed both Hufanga and Jaquan McMillan. And the reason I bring that play up is because we got the sack, obviously. But as they're blitzing, I'm like, how did Hufanga and McMillan not run into each other? Like, That was what I was thinking about that. And Vance Joseph said something from Wade Phillips that I thought was really, really smart. He said, the mistakes are on me, but the effort is on you. Okay. You schematically get outdone by a tactically sound guy in Shane Steichen earlier in this year. Fine. Perfectly fine. But, whenever a player makes mistakes, I'm rarely like, okay, that was Vance Joseph's fault. Talanoa Hufanga, usually rock solid, missed a tackle on Travis Kelce this past week. And I'm like, okay, that's not Vance Joseph's fault. Anytime that we have had like a Riley Moss DPI, shout out to Moss in the background in my camera right there. That's not on Vance Joseph. I think it's largely on the individual players for losing the reps. And Vance Joseph is so smart. Like, I completely underestimated how smart of a defensive mind he is when we hired him again. I was just like, yeah, this guy is just in over his head. He's the Hackett of defense, but that's not true. That's not true at all. He is the exact opposite, and he's going to be a head coach again. Um, this should actually be 4. Sorry about that. But players actually developing. Okay. So from 2016 to 2022, player development was very rare. Okay. And I think about this mainly on the offensive side of the ball, but it was pretty relevant on the defensive side of the ball too. Okay. I think about, if you're thinking about defense, I think about Bradley Chubb. I think about how many other wasted picks we had on defense. Brendan Langley. I think about Isaac Yadam, just guys who, Sua Cravens, just guys who just never got going, okay? And the reason I brought up Bradley Chubb is not because he fizzled out or anything like that, but the rookie year was literally the best year we saw of Chubb. And then it was just all downhill from there. And the offensive side of the ball wasn't immune to this too. So once again, it all goes back to Sean Payton. The offensive side of the ball, think about like Fant, think about Reisner. All those guys played so well early on, and they just hit a wall. And you're just like, what happened? But then we have real player development now. And it was more of a problem on offense that time, as I had mentioned, but the defense wasn't much better during this time frame. Every OTA, we would hear about the fact that, oh, the defense is doing really well and they're well ahead of the offense. Well, it's because it was the 17th ranked defense going up against the 30th ranked offense. But in 2023, the player acquisition philosophy changed largely. Or I guess I should say in 2021, because we did get Surtain and Cooper and Browning in those drafts. And I know Browning didn't pan out here, but I think the process was more the same. Okay, you wanted guys that fit the vision, okay? And part of this is positional coaching, which I'm going to talk about plenty of positional coaches here soon. And part of it is recognizing what guys will get it in the NFL, if that makes sense. Okay, I felt like from the end of the Elway years to, the early George Payton years, like I'm talking 21 and 22, I felt like a lot of the key acquisitions we made were largely just based off of, talent and talent alone. And while that worked out sometimes, you had guys like Cortland Sutton, you had guys like, Surtain, obviously. And while that worked out sometimes, a lot of the times the talent would just fail, and we'd draft guys that mentally just weren't there and wouldn't get it in the NFL. Jerry Jeudy, think about him, all the talent in the world, but wasn't willing to put his ego aside. You think about KJ Hamler, always getting hurt, just for whatever reason, never developed either. So the player development was just not good for a long time on the defensive side of the ball, but now it is good. And the reason it's good is because, A, your vision is, all right, how are we going to draft smart guys? And how are we going to draft guys that are mentally tough? And Vance Joseph talked about this in the interview with Schrager yesterday. He said, with Jade Barron in particular, he didn't want to throw him out there. And he didn't want to just throw him into the fire, because some guys, they don't recover from that. Some guys, it may take a long time for them to recover. Some guys, they either have it or they don't. And you don't want to destroy a young player's confidence right out of the gate and right off the bat. So, yeah, that was part of the reason that, all these acquisitions were made of mentally tough players who fit the vision. And once again, I go back to that. But yeah, and then 4 incredible positional coaching staff. So it's no accident that we've had guys hit a new level of potential on the defensive side of the ball. Okay. And the positional coaches, here's who they are. Jamar Cain, he is a pass rush coach who turned every unit he coached into gold in college football. He is largely responsible for Nick Bonito developing into the player that he was today at Oklahoma. And it's just very poetic that he's now with the Broncos again on the D-line. He got a promotion from pass rush coach in 2023 to D-line coach in 2024. And Jim Leonard, man, he's a secondary coach that a lot of people who are connected believe he will be an NFL head coach within 5 years. I remember I was watching, I can't remember if it was Chase Daniel or Brett Coleman, but they said that when they talked about the Broncos staff, they said that they have potentially two head coaches in waiting in Davis Webb and Jim Leonard. And that's crazy. That's crazy that we're already there in the Sean Payton tree. But, Jim Leonard has taken Patrick Surtain's game to new heights, even though Patrick Surtain was already the best corner in football when Jim Leonard got there. But Jim Leonard's first year, Surtain wins the Defensive Player of the Year. Brandon Jones, Talanoa Hufanga, Riley Moss, Jaquan, like all these guys have developed so well and taken their game to new levels with Jim Leonard as the defensive backs coach. And one that I think I can really pinpoint is Chris Abenstrain, man. We drafted him in 2024, 5th-round pick out of Mizzou, and he is so good as a backup. Like, he is a very quality guy. So, and I don't know how he was able to develop so well, but anytime he's on the field, he's just playing super duper well. And I'm just like, wow. Every time he's on the field, he's like, picking off Herbert, or he's breaking up a pass one-on-one contested opportunity with Rashee Rice. And I'm like, where is this guy? Like, why is this guy not getting on the field more? Like Chris Harris Jr. said, how are we going to keep this guy off the field? And the reality of the situation is, I don't know. But also, I want to give a shout out to the private pass rush coach, BT Jordan, for helping John Franklin Myers, Benito, and Allen all develop. Now, JFM, Benito, and Allen are all clients of his, but yeah. So Jamar Cain has helped. Think about Allen, think about Cooper, think about Benito, like all the guys on our front seven, or I should say just pass rush in general. All those guys have hit new heights that I thought, and new potentials that I thought encapsulated truly anything further that they were greater than when I looked at them and I was just like, well, Zach Allen, I remember at the end of 2023, I was like, well, he's not that good of a free agent signing. And then he suddenly becomes one of the best interior defensive linemen in football. Benito, I was like, all right, he's a Robin, but he's not a Batman. And then he comes out and he just does nothing except make plays, and he shuts the game down. And I'm pretty sure he's still leading the NFL in pressures. Actually, that might be Myles Garrett, but Benito's impact has been incredible. Jonathan Cooper, shout out to him, man. He came in 2024. He looked like an entirely new player. So, yeah. And then, overall, the incredible positional coaching staff is the final reason why our defense is what it is today. And once again, you can trace all of it back to Sean Payton and Vance Joseph and George Payton. All three of those guys have done an amazing job building this defense. But I want to hear from you. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below.